David. So if you've ever seen any of the Immortal Era Kickstarter videos, usually done by David as well, then you've heard his theme song. And he kind of, I gave him some ideas, some bands that I listened to, and he took those songs and built a theme song that sounds just like, you know, all the post-rock stuff that I love. So those who don't know his stuff, check it out. And definitely, if you need a theme song for your book, he's your guy.
Appreciate you.
All right, Timothy, tell us a little bit about yourself, and welcome back, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Edward. I had such a blast on the show last week, and I think you have great topics, so I'm very grateful to be included. My name's Timothy B. Fling. I'm a writer and musician from New York, Pennsylvania. I'm also a podcaster. Some of you guys know me from that. Everybody's welcome as well if they ever want to come on and shout out their projects. But today, man, I'm excited to talk about your topic, which is some of the comics that were never made into films, or are what we would consider our Mount Rushmore. That's something I take very seriously. And I'm looking forward to chatting with D Major. I'm a composer myself, and it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. You know, we talked a couple of times about the marriage between comics and music, and it seems to be a thing, right? Especially in our small circle. Many of us are musicians. So I'm not sure why that is. So I'd like to learn more.
Great. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into our first topic. And as Timothy was saying, we have a few this week. So the first one is we're talking about our comic Mount Rushmore. And I know, Chris, you kind of joined in at the last minute. So if you want to go last, so you have a little chance to think, I can put you in there last. So our topics this week, just so you know and everyone else, our first one is our comic Mount Rushmore. So that's, 4 presidents on there. What are the 4 comic books that you think should be put up on that Mount Rushmore as the greatest achievements in comic writing? And then our second one is, what is a comic that hasn't been made into a film or TV series that you'd like to see get adapted? And then the final one is talking about these late sequels that keep popping up. So I just saw on the internet announced this week that Goonies is going to be getting a sequel after 30 plus years, and they just did Beetlejuice last a few summers ago. We had the Top Gun Maverick. So what's the movie you want to dig out of the cobwebs and give one of these late sequels to? So those are our topics for the week, and we're starting off with our comic Mount Rushmore. So David, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can kick us off.
Right.
And it's funny when Ed, when you sent me the questions I had to ask you, I was like, full disclosure, I only read indie comic books.
Now, that's the best.
So everything I mentioned might be things that most people haven't heard of, but they definitely should check out.
Nice.
Which, it just real quick, being an indie hobbyist is interesting because when people ask me if I like a certain thing, I tell them yes, but I can't name them anything that they recognize. Mm-hmm. So it's like, does he really read comic books? Or is he just making stuff up? But my Mount Rushmore would definitely be, there's a comic called Macchiato by Macchiato Studios. It's kind of got like, if Power Rangers and Death Note had a baby. So, you got your super powered fighters in their super suits. But there's someone in the story who is a traitor, and you don't know as the reader, as the people in the story. And it's really fun to like read through and see like the intense action, to see these elements of found family, but also know that somebody's a snake.
Okay.
So that one's really interesting. Unrivaled is another really great like underdog story, kind of like big fish in a small pond that finally goes outside where they are and realize that, man, there's a lot more to learn than I thought. But also a lot of really good twists and turns. That's by Zero Snake Media. Third one would be Delta Dogs, which I just really love because it makes me feel like it reminds me of being a kid with my like friends in high school, but if we all had superpowers.
Okay.
So it's still very much like set in a real world setting where they, something weird happened that gave them power. So they have to keep it secret because they know that there are people who will come after them and all of these other sorts of things.
Okay.
But to just see like the bond that is built between, their brotherhood is just really inspiring. And my last one, actually gotta look at my list. I wrote them down because I knew I was like, one's gonna slip my mind. Nice. Oh, I remember it. This one was called Blake Undying. which was another super fire comic. And it's about this character who we're on YouTube, right? So I believe the correct term is wants to unalive himself. Very depressed. And in the process of doing this, realizes he can't. He can't die.
Okay. Throw him in my universe, he'll be just fine.
Oh yeah, he's like, oh, so everyone's like me. So it's really interesting, like seeing this character who's like struggling with the life they're already dealing with, they can't escape from, and kind of resolves to, well, this is how I'm stuck. Maybe I can help make other people's lives less miserable. People who've been screwed over like me. So it's also like a really impactful story. I think it teaches a lot of cool lessons. But that's
nice.
my fault.
See, and I love it because now you gave people something to go check out. Like, okay, they're not going to know these titles, but that's something they can go seek out. And that's why when you said, can I do indie? I'm like, absolutely, because the people that are in here, we write indie comics, and the fact that you love indie series enough to want to put them on your Mount Rushmore, I mean, that's the ultimate honor, where you're like, okay, forget about Marvel, DC. These are the books that moved me. So yeah,
I don't know anything about those other comics.
Oh no, that's amazing.
I'm indie to the bone.
Yes, and that means I got to go check these ones out because they all sound really good. So yeah, check them out and seek out these titles and definitely read them, because I don't think I've read any of them. So you kind of gave me new food for thought. All right, so Timothy, well, let's hear your Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, so those were some good picks, man. I appreciate being pointed towards new material because I'm always looking for inspiration, I guess you might say. And generally speaking, if something has inspired another musician, I'm even more inclined to check it out. I take a great deal of inspiration from different types of things. For my Mount Rushmore, I picked maybe what you might consider a little bit more mainstream titles. And I can go by the title or the author. As you guys know, I'm a writer, so I lean toward the writer's end of comics. I'm not an illustrator myself. But I would say that for my Mount Rushmore, I would jump right in. The first big one, right, is The Watchmen. And that was one of the first ones that I read where I was, if you remember, that was during the movement of the late 80s where they started to say things like, hey, comics can be good, because they went through a long period of where, let's be honest, comics weren't that good. And we're kind of going through some of that a little bit right now, some people might say. But the truth is, when they talked about Alan Moore, and he's got, the symmetrical panels, and there's different pages match if they're held to a mirror. And it was just extremely creative. And even the instrumentation of the covers, where the covers are actually taken from one small fragment of one of the panels, and then they blow it up really big. I had an example there if you want to drop it in the add to stage there at the bottom. What you see in there is the cover to The Watchmen, and most people recognize that image. It's a very prevalent image, but it's from the first page of the book where he throws the comedian off the side of the building, and when he gets to the bottom, it's a smiley face button, and there's just a single drop of blood on the button. And that's the image that you'll see on the front cover, and it represents that whole image. It's really creative the way he did that. My second pick that I wanted to give, I am a huge Sandman fan. This is written by Neil Gaiman. This is part of the Vertigo line in the early 90s, I guess it was. And that's sort of a supernatural thriller. And it was made into a Netflix series a couple of years back, which my understanding, it was pretty popular. I don't have Netflix anymore. But that's my buddy John. What's up, John? Another musician. So that was part of the Vertigo line. And that's another thing where, again, this book was very well written. What I mean by that is these would likely be successful titles, even if they were written in prose. My next choice, I wanted to go with something a little bit unusual, you might say. That's Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. Again, this was one that was made into, I think it was an HBO Max series. I forget right now who it was. But the thing I like about that one is it's got some really offbeat characters and really creatively written. And if you haven't read the Doom Patrol, I definitely recommend it. It's not what you think. And if you go in thinking, hey, it's like the Justice League or something, you're going to be shocked by how weird it is. And for my last pick, I wanted to go with something that was maybe a little bit lesser known, which is Paul Chadwick's Concrete. This is one of the indie titles. I'm an indie guy myself. And this is, in my opinion, one of the overlooked classics in the comics years. And I say that because most people that have read it say, man, this is really good. And for whatever reason, it was never really commercialized. And like other fans of the series, they know it and they say, yeah, man, thanks for mentioning it. It's so good. But it was not ever made into a TV show or a movie or anything like that. And I think that's a shame.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my Mount Rushmore. That's my 4. And the one, I guess, weakness you might say in my pick, you probably noticed, is that it heavily leans toward writers and less so towards artists. And I did that intentionally. I'll tell you why. In the comics field, and I'm not saying whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I've noticed that there's a real tendency for writers to say things like, hey, I'm just writing the dialogue, and then I turn it into the artist, and the artist makes the page. Mm-hmm. That's fine. But every example I just gave you, that is not the case of what was done.
No.
And a friendly reminder, the comics medium is a marriage of those two things. It is art and writing, right? And it's something that I believe each part is equally as important. So I lean toward the writing titans, as it were, because you can see why these books are so well regarded and why they stood the test of time. I love beautiful art. Look, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, if the story's not good, it can be a death blow to a title.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Brad, how's it going? And I think what you were saying goes well with some of the early Image work. They had the best artists out there and some of the worst stories written. They were practically unreadable stories. Some of them never made it to an issue 2. You got this big, flashy, beautifully illustrated pile of garbage. So it kind of shows that you need that marriage of both. And then the Image titles that have persevered were the ones that were actually well written. Those are the ones we still see. And the other ones, they kind of faded away. They were one and done. And I mean, I remember at that time thinking, all right, I'm about to fund my retirement by going and buying all these Image #1s, not realizing they're printing millions of them. And I was buying 80s and 90s baseball cards, so I got a lot of junk, paper and cardboard in my garage. But you read them and you're 3 or 4 pages in, and even as a high schooler, I realized this is just not good. And you put it down because that cover, you're like, holy crap, that's beautiful. But that's all there is, it's empty but beautiful. So that's why, like you said, you got to have that marriage of both. So when you're saying that, it just my brain immediately flashed to Vertigo from those, early to late 90s Vertigo titles, when it was just not Vertigo, sorry, Image. Vertigo was amazing. So we won't disparage them, but those Image titles and just
I totally agree with you, because I'm a collector myself, and I remember the Image launches. And again, at those times, it was like, hey, they had the greatest artists in the world, and we all bought multiple copies. Mm-hmm. But I think most of us, and like you mentioned it, we bought the first couple, and it's like, oh, these aren't very good. And then you go across the street, so to speak, to look at the Vertigo line, and they had Hellblazer and Swamp Thing and The Sandman and all these really terrific titles. So it was... in those days, the editor was Karen Berger, if you remember her. And she just had the magic touch on finding these. Well, they were primarily British writers, right? It was at the time they called it the British invasion of comics. But it was the way they wrote the stories. Like, even if you read the script and it was without the art, it was still very compelling. You know what I mean? Whereas if you would read the average issue of Spawn without the art, what's going on here?
It's not amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so Chris, you feel comfortable giving us your Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of really awesome answers so far. And Timothy, I was lucky enough to find a whole run of Concrete one time in a half-price books, and I just picked it up on a whim, and I just fell in love. So awesome answer that I would not have thought about, because just doesn't pop to the top of mind until somebody else mentions it. But yeah, I love that book. So glad you mentioned it. My first one, I'm going to pick Hellboy and BPRD. I'm just going to lump them together into one. I think it's just an amazing series that's, awesome art. The writing is phenomenal. And the overall, probably one of my favorite series of all time, if not my favorite. And then the next one I'll pick after that is Saga. I
Oh,
love both the writing and the art in that one, and something about like when that series was first coming out, like I had freshly had a kid, and just like the experience of the newborn child as these characters are kind of dealing with the same thing just hit me really hard. And like I was going through a period in my life where I lost both of my parents, and like a lot of the grief that the characters were going through, like I was feeling myself, and just something about it really, really connected with me. And then just Fiona Staples' art is just delightful.
Mm-hmm.
Up next, I'll pick Asterix, which is one of my other favorite comics of all time. If you haven't read it, it's by a couple of French dudes, and it's about a rebellious clan of Gauls during the Roman Empire, and it's full of just ridiculous humor. And it's one of my favorite things in the world. You can get a ton of like the back issues if you just go to any comic shop and pick them up, and you will not be disappointed if you just grab a random one and take a look. And then my last one, under the pressure of a few minutes time, it was hard for me to narrow it down to something, so I just kind of threw a couple of things out there that I thought were kind of fun. I was inspired by the other Sandman answer from Timothy, and I was going to throw out Sandman Mystery Theater because I love Davis's art.
Yeah,
and that is awesome. Also, time will tell, I guess, whether or not these other two might really count as a Mount Rushmore. But Headlopper, I love that series.
Yeah.
And Do a Powerbomb. I just love Daniel Warren Johnson's art and wanted to throw something out there by him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that particular series just kind of really made me fall in love with it. But I'd say my fourth slot is kind of up in the air and dependent on how I'm
great
feeling.
answers. Yeah, I can't believe I forgot Saga.
Yeah, and see that's good because if everyone picks the same, I guess obviously staying good. But David's like, no, here I'm going to throw the curveball at all of you. But for mine, I kind of went more traditional because I thought of what made me begin to love comic books to put for my beginning Mount Rushmore. So that would be just overall Spider-Man. That and Batman were the two that kind of made me begin to love comics. Because as a kid, you're not looking for the deep stories. I mean, Image would have been just fine for the 6 and 7-year-old me. Yeah. It was, flashy pictures, lots of action, and that would, that satisfied the kid in me. And those were what I started reading. I would go with my dad would take me to the swap meets, and I would get, these collected versions of Spider-Man, of early Batman, and those are what just kind of built the fire for loving comic books. And then I, thought, I can do these, and realized I had no artistic talent. So that was the realization that I better be the other side of these comics because I can't draw for shit. So, bring in something else. And then it was, as you were talking about, Timothy, Sandman was the one that kind of woke up the realization that, wow, there's a lot more to comic books. And I've told the story before, but how I actually got into Sandman was when The Death of Superman was coming out. Right. Everybody wanted a copy of that. I went to my local comic shop and I said, all right, give me like 25 copies of it. So I just bought them all. And everyone, this was in high school, all the jocks, all the people that had never cared about comic books, they all knew I was that comic nerd. So they're like, you're that comic guy, right? You can get me a copy of the Superman Death. I'm like, oh yeah, I got like 5 in my backpack right now. Give me $50 and it's yours. So I'm already, upselling them because I know these people will never buy another comic in their life. Right. But then one guy was like, all right, I don't have money, but how about we trade? He goes, I have a copy of Sandman #1. Wow. Want to trade me for that? And I thought, all right, I don't know this Sandman, but this guy's a comic guy like me. So I'm going to trust him because he's someone who reads and he goes, this series will change your life. And he wasn't exaggerating. I handed him off that copy of Superman's Death and got the first copy of Sandman. And I immediately, I'm like, all right, I'm getting a subscription for this. That's when you cut out the little thing in the back, get your subscription sent to your house. And I was still smart enough not to cut it. I had my dad make a photocopy, and I was getting Sandman. I was getting Swamp Thing. I was getting, all the great Vertigo series sent straight to my house. Because at that point, it was harder to find a local comic shop. And I think it was you could find 20 baseball card shops to one comic shop at that time. Now it's kind of flipped where you can find a lot more comic shops than baseball card shops. But I thought, I'm not going to fight this. I'm just going to make sure, because a lot of times you go into the local comic shop, they're like, yeah, I ordered 2 copies of Sandman. They already sold, so you're out of luck. So I immediately got my subscription and have the full run of Sandman. Not in great shape because they mailed them, and they didn't mail them that well. They didn't have good comic book mailers. They just slapped them in there, and you got them bent in your mailbox like a magazine or something. But that Sandman would have to be my number 3. And then as far as number 4 goes, I think it's kind of like Chris was saying, it's a constantly floating list. And I'll bring in another series by the same author you were talking about, and that would be Y the Last Man. I just loved that series so much. And it's one of those also ones I had the subscription, because I would get, 6 or 7 Vertigo titles every month in the mailbox, because those were the series I loved. I stopped buying the Image stuff because, it's like, all right, I don't need to read more fluff. And then there was, so many bad crossovers and things like that going on in the 80s and 90s. Like, okay, now it's Nightfall. Now it's Age of Apocalypse. Now, the next thing you must read, where we change the universe until we change it again. And I just kind of thought, all right, I'm done with all the mainstream stuff and going to start reading this. And same kind of thing happened to me with music. I think it was like that new metal that made me think I don't want to ever hear another song from that genre again, and kind of dug deep into indie music the same way I dug into indie comic books. So you kind of realize what's in the mainstream is just an illusion of what the good stuff is. And if you dig deep, that's where you find all the amazing work by bands, by comic writers, by, novel writers. You just have to go a little bit further down to find what's amazing out there. And then I don't know how to say it right, but is it Jari or Jerry asked if we're reading the Absolute DC series, and I have a lot of the Absolute DC collections. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, where I have like the Absolute Watchman and all the thick Sandman and Preacher books. So yeah, if that's what you're referring to, yeah, I get those big thick hardcovers that are printed on much larger paper stock and make that artwork just pop even more. So all my favorite series, I buy those giant Absolutes, and it's kind of, you can see my bookshelf behind me, and there's a lot of those sitting on there. All right, so let's move on to our next topic, and I know Timothy is ready for this one. And then this was
I dropped a Y the Last Man image because I didn't know if you'd want to talk about that. But the first thing is, I'm also a huge fan of Y the Last Man, but my pick for the undeveloped movie property was Concrete, Paul Chadwick's Concrete. And I say this in the sense, and first, thanks for Chris for his kind words. I was the same way. I think that when you read Concrete, you're not 100% sure what to expect. And you look at it and you think, hey, well, he's obviously a superhero, right? And he's kind of like the Thing. It's like a rock being. But then you read the series and it's not that at all. As a matter of fact, most of the time it goes wrong for Concrete. He constantly makes mistake. His origin story is disturbing. A spoiler, this came out, 30 years ago, maybe 40 now. But his origin was that he was on a camping trip with a friend, and they stumbled across a UFO, like an alien location hidden in a mountain. And they stole his body and implanted his brain into this indestructible container. And he describes it in the book as being like a permanent rape. Wow. And I remember that struck with me over the years, because this isn't a hero who's so glad that he's Concrete. Like, he has no way to get his body back. And yeah, Brad Lone Wolf, that's some good stuff, man. But I always thought that Concrete would make a great movie property. And here's the reason why. Number one, it's got the sci-fi trappings. Right? The book's not really about that, but that is the origin story. It's aliens. And the second thing is that he has lots of drama. He fails all the time. Like, most of his things don't work out the first time, and he doesn't want to be a hero. And then the third thing is you got a little bit of a love interest, in that he's in love, an unrequited love with there's a scientist that's assigned to take samples from him and to learn about his alien body. and he like falls in love with her. Her name's Maureen. And it's a really interesting relationship because, of course, he doesn't have the capability of being a man. He doesn't have any kind of external genitalia. He's much too large and dangerous to even hug somebody. And it's a little bit, it's kind of like an Edward Scissorhands type thing, where he's almost kind of dangerous to the people around him because his body is so, well, it's like a giant block of concrete is what it is.
Yeah. So I haven't read that. Now you got me interested in checking out that series, and that, you know, hopefully someone does decide to pick it up. I think that we've kind of missed the boom of where Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus were adapting everything that was out there. And now it seems to be kind of trickling down, but everything moves in waves. So I think, you know, the pendulum will eventually swing to, let's find those unknown, you know, obscure indie titles that will blow people's minds. So,
and it's very inexpensive. It was not a, like the prior, this is not like a hot thing. You know, you can buy the collectives. There's like a digest version. I think they're like $5 a pop. I bought a 7-volume set. I think it was $20.
Okay, that's the way.
And at the time, it was critically well received. It won an Eisner Award. People love it. Paul Chadwick was kind of known, the creator. His name's Paul Chadwick. He was kind of known for being a script writer. That's a little bit like what his style is like. A little bit like Brian K. Vaughan. If you like Brian K. Vaughan, you're going to like Concrete. The two are sort of, I always say they're spiritual cousins. They're almost written the same way. And it's really sort of, it's very emotional. And it's not, I guess I would say it's non-comic-y in the sense that he never wins a fight by punching anyone. You know, the government is trying to cover up his existence because they don't want the public to know that the aliens were real. So he can't even like go out into public. It's really, it's really intriguing.
Nice. Yeah, definitely one to check out. All right. So the topic is, what do you want to see adapted into a movie? Just so, Chris, so you know, so I'll have you go last again. So what is a comic that hasn't been done that you'd like to see adapted into either a movie or a series on one of the streamers out there? So David, what is your pick for this one?
Well, as y'all know, it's going to be another comic book that you may or may not heard of. Actually, you may, because y'all know Edward. And you know, this isn't to a brown nose or anything, but I feel like I've told you this before, Edward. Immortal Era would make a fire ass movie. That movie would be so good. I mean, I feel like it kind of scratches that itch of, you know, people that like these zombie post-apocalyptic type of things. It's kind of got like this overground that seems like a normal society, but under that is this really rough kind of place. So it kind of reminds me of like the Matrix in that way. And what I like the most about the story, and I mean, it's weird because it kind of happened over the time, but I genuinely feel like it gave me a different perspective on what death meant, and it made it not as bad of a thing in my mind. Because when you see a world, and I know you said you base it off of another folktale that, you know, has kind of like a similar idea, but when you see a world where people don't die and how miserable that is, and you compare it to what we have now, you know, obviously I'd still want everybody to live a long and healthy life. But it has to come to an end. Because if it doesn't, that is torture. That is a torture worse than death. So I feel like it's taught me that. And I think, I just think it'd be an amazing movie.
I can't disagree. And I'm hoping I'm hoping to get it out there. I'm actually working with a producer who's we're pitching it to studios. So hopefully something materializes with that one and we can see this one on the screen. But yeah, for me, the theme was always, you know, death isn't the worst thing that can happen. So yeah, it's one of the things you said. It's like, this is the book where I'm rooting for everyone to die in the end. And people don't quite understand that. Like, what, you hate the characters? Like, no, read the book, then you'll understand. But yeah, that's what I tell if I'm at my my table at a con. I'm like, all right, this is the book you're going to root for everyone to die in the end of natural causes eventually. I said, you don't want them to just drop dead, but you want that death would be a blessing in this, you know, this terrible universe. So yeah, thank you for that. I always appreciate that. And like I said, hopefully, fingers crossed, something materializes with the producer I'm working with, and we can see this thing on the screen somehow, some way, and not butcher my vision. That's the thing that scares me, because I know poor Alan Moore, he has not seen much of his work get done well, and he's just like, I don't care anymore. Don't even tell me it's being made. Keep my name off it. I want nothing to do with this anymore. So yeah, it's one of those things where you hope it gets done, but you also hope it gets done the right way. And
100%.
yeah, so yeah,
100%.
fingers crossed that something materializes with that. So all right, Chris, what's your pick for this one?
So it's gonna feel a little bit like I'm just re-stealing an answer off of my Mount Rushmore list, but I would love to see a VPRD series get made by something like HBO, where like it's not really centered around Hellboy. Like maybe he shows up every now and then, but it's mostly focused on like you could create multiple seasons out of just like Plague of Frogs and everything that happens there, and like I think just really diving into like Liz and Roger the Homunculus and like Johann Kraus and all of those guys, I think would just make for a really, really cool like HBO series with I mentioned HBO so it could have a really big budget, kind of like Game of Thrones, so you could get some really, really cool scenes of the creepy stuff that happens there. So.
Yeah, and also with HBO, the good thing is they can take their time. They can adapt it slower. Where when you make a movie and you got 2.5 hours max to work with, it's all about chopping. And with HBO, you can kind of let the story breathe. And that's why I think ideally, if any of my works or works that I love got adapted, I would love to see them done on some sort of a streamer with, like you said, with a good budget, and then just time to let the story breathe instead of, all right, we have to move at this breakneck pace, and eventually people are just lost. If they don't know the story, you have someone who does know it having to fill in all the blanks for them. So yeah, HBO would be the perfect way to see something like this made out there.
Great roster of characters too, Chris. It's one of the secrets, right, to a good, well, especially a series or a movie. You got to have memorable characters, and the Mike Mignola characters, man, are some of the best, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, I love his characters. I love his art style. So he's one that I love reading his stuff. So for mine, I made the topic and then was having a hard time thinking about it, because so many of the ones I love have been adapted, maybe not well, but it's not what do we want to see get readapted. That could be a question for another day, because there's plenty that I'd love to see get a second chance. But I think about this one, especially as an elementary school teacher and a father. It's a series that I read with my children. My students have read it, and that's the Bone series by Jeff Smith.
I knew you were going to say that.
I think that series, I mean, it's the first comic that I sat down and read aloud to my kids. It's the ones that, I have to get new copies every year for my classroom because the class tears through them. It's a story that I love. It's would be great to see that done as an animated series. What I don't want to see is, like the next Sonic, where you got the CG bone characters and you got the human ones running around. But it's one of those stories that it's kind of an indie inspiration as well, because Jeff Smith, he started this series by shipping it from his garage, calling comic shops, getting it in there, kind of like the Eastman and Laird got the Ninja Turtle series out there. He just had to do it all self-published. That's why it starts in black and white. Then it eventually got bought by Scholastic. So it's, now a lot bigger. And I have a large part of his run in the black and white originals, like that one with the cartoon books. And it's one of those things I would love to see it done right for all the fans of the book. Because I know, kids that have gone through my classroom, my own kids, even though they're older now, would just get so excited to see this series done as an animation, 3 or 4 season animated series on one of the streamers.
That's such a good answer. My wife's an elementary school teacher as well, and I also pushed her to put it in her classroom, and her kids just eat it up and they love it as well.
Oh yeah, it's that, and then the Raina Telgemeier books, like the Smile and Sisters. Those books I cannot keep good copies in my class, because every year they get read so much that they're falling out of the spine, the pages. But I thought that's the sign of a well-read book, and there's never a problem with that. So I tell the kids, all right, I'll order my new my new set of Bone books. I'll order my new set of Raina books. And yeah, the fact that the kids are passionately reading it, and one kid finishes Bone book 1, he's like, I need book 1 now. You need to give me book 1. Here's book 2. And they're trading it off, and they're fighting to be the next one to read it in the sequence. It's like that. That's never a bad thing. And when parents want them to be reading more enlightened literature, I'm like, your kid is passionately reading. Don't complain about that. That's a beautiful thing. And you may think that there's better, more elite books they should be reading, but the fact that they're reading books until they fall apart is something you should just be elated about and not complaining. Well, they shouldn't be reading Goosebumps or Bone or whatever it is. They should be reading, I don't know, fill in the blank series they think is worthy. And I just tell them passionate reading is a blessing in whatever form it comes in.
Agreed. And man, I tell you, if you got them fighting over the next issue, you're doing something right.
Yeah. So I try to inspire a passion of reading in my class. Can't let them read my book, unfortunately, because they always go, when can we read yours? I'm thinking, one day I'll write a kid's book that they can read. I actually have one that I'm developing that will be more elementary school appropriate, just so I can give them something that they could read. But where we stand right now, I'm not handing a copy of Immortal Era to a 3rd grader. I don't need to cause them nightmares.
Well, and you make a great point too, and I think all of us are guilty of this. We have a little bit of our own biases. Actually, I'll use myself as an example so I don't sound like I'm being critical. I have a little bit of bias, and what I mean by that, we've forgotten a little bit the joy of when you're seeing something for the first time. Like when you talk about these kids seeing Bone for the first time, and what do they learn? Hey, reading's cool. Comics are cool. This is fun. And that might be the most important part. You fast forward to me with years and even decades of bias, I'm afraid to admit that. And it makes me gravitate a little bit toward the arguably more sophisticated scripts. And that might not be a good thing. Maybe it could be depending on how intensely I made it, perhaps it's a form of gatekeeping even. Because there's a lot of people who say things like, well, hey, well, I don't care for Alan Moore's work or Grant Morrison or Neil Gaiman. It's a little bit dense, and it is a little bit dense. So, what that means is guys like me, I'll use myself. I've forgotten the joy of what it was like the first time you picked up Spider-Man, or in my case, Marvel 2-in-1 or Marvel Team Up, where they used to team up the 2 heroes together and you'd get 2 for the price of 1. And I admit that I loved all those books when I started. And if it wouldn't have been for those, I would never have found my way to the other one. So you have a good point there.
And that's kind of why it had to be on my Mount Rushmore, because the Spider-Man and the Batman, I remember when the Batman movie came out, I was so passionate about that. And I had to go and buy all the Batman books that I could find, all the collected trades. So it's like, even though I don't go to a comic shop and pick up a Spider-Man or a Batman book now, I think about where I started with them, and the fact that, I would finish that Spider-Man trade that had issues 1 through 6, and I had to get the next 6, and it was, that fed that fire as a kid. And it's good to see, especially as someone who's been teaching for 25 years, see kids leave with that fire, and then have a kid come up to me, 5, 6, 7 years after they've been in my class and be like, did you know they're making a movie of, Coraline, which was one of my read aloud books because I love Neil Gaiman. Like, did you know they were going to make a Coraline movie? I can't wait to see it. And, starting as reading it just when it came out as a book, and then the years later when it became a movie, the fact that they were so passionate, they had to come back to my classroom to tell me they're making a movie and they can't wait to see it. So we actually, when the Coraline movie came out, I said, okay, any of the kids that I have now, any of my kids from the past, let's all just fill up a movie theater. So we sold out a movie theater near our school, and was all just students and former students watching the Coraline movie. So that's when I think, okay, that's that passion of reading that kind of kept going, and they had to be there to see it because that was their favorite book that I read aloud to them that year.
Nice.
All right. So our final topic today kind of takes us into non-comic book territory, and that is the late sequels. We're seeing a large wave of sequels 30 years or more later. We saw Beetlejuice just got released. I still haven't seen it, but I eventually will. I know Top Gun Maverick took years to come out with a sequel, and now they're going to make another sequel to that. And then just announced that they're making a new Goonies movie. So is there an 80s or 90s movie that you would like to see kind of brought back into the spotlight to see, one, late sequel 30 years later with at least some of the main characters intact? So, David, would you like to go first?
Oh, yeah, I'm excited about this one. Who remembers Page Masters?
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I remember Page Masters. You
Good
got
pick.
Macaulay Culkin. He is stuck in a library, and all the books come to life.
Yes.
It's one of those movies that it came out when I was pretty young. I think it said 94, so I was 4 years old. So it's almost like a fever dream, where it's like you feel like you watched it, but you also, it was so long ago, you don't know if it actually existed. It's kind of like that for me. But I just think that concept, especially with like all of the stories that have been created since the first Page Master, I mean, it could be a licensing nightmare, but it also could be like the most epic movie of all time with his favorite characters from books or comics or whatever, just, in the world on this big adventure.
Yeah, and now Macaulay Culkin could be the librarian or something. You could bring him in that capacity.
Full circle.
Yeah, so you get that. Okay, there's your legacy guy in the movie, and then it's just opening up, like you said, a brand new world of books. And we'll let the studios fight for all those rights. This is just our pick. So the studios can do it. If they made it work for Who Framed Roger Rabbit back in the day, they can do it for this and get some of those great books that he has to go through. So yeah, that's a really good one. And it's funny, I had forgotten about that movie until you said it. It's like, yeah, it's one of those movies, you see it, you enjoy it, and then it just like years later you forget about it. But that's the perfect one to dust off and bring back, because people don't have that same deep love and connection. Like with Goonies, you're getting a 50-50 split of people saying, oh, cool, or how dare you. And anytime you do that, you get that anger. But I think with Page Master, there's not going to be the anger with it. It's just going to be like, yeah, that's right. That was a cool movie. And there's a lot of new books. So you're not going to offend the purists who think this is a sacred thing that you better not touch again. And how dare you? And I'll never see it on principle. This one, Page Master, is not going to inspire that same kind of anger with it. So yeah, I think that's a perfect pick.
I got an image there if you want to toss it to the viewers, Ed.
All righty.
Yeah, great pick, D Major. I had forgotten about that one until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, so did I. And as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh, yes, that is absolutely perfect. Macaulay Culkin is the librarian now, or maybe it's his kid who gets in there where he has some of that legacy connection, but then the rest of it is just, a wild new adventure with a new kid in a library full of new and untapped books that we didn't see the first time around.
Definitely one of those movies where they're like, oh, yeah.
And you say it, and it's like immediately, yes, I remember it now.
And
all right, so
me and Tim were talking about this earlier. Who remembers the song from that movie?
Oh, man.
Right, who remembers crying to that? When You Believe? Oh, my God.
Yes.
I kind of remember it.
Yeah, as soon as you say it, I'm like, I got to remember, because it's been so long. But yeah, that's a good one. All right, so Chris, you can go second if you're ready. If not, I can move over to Timothy.
So my favorite movie of all time is Big Trouble in Little China. So I think that would probably be my pick, as long as it's not the version that they were talking about where The Rock was going to remake it. And where he would probably never lose a fight, because the whole point of him is he's supposed to be the sidekick who sucks.
Yeah.
But that would be probably my pick would be Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, I'd love to see that one, especially you got more modern special effects, and I think you could tell a bigger and even crazier story. So that'd be a fun one to see. As like I said, as long as it's not The Rock's, I can't lose a fight, and he'll just he'll ruin it. So we don't need to see that version of it. All right, so let me pop it up. There's our Big Trouble in Little China. Watched it for so long. It's like you guys are making me want to go back and revisit the original versions, and then hope to one day get those. So yeah, that's a great one. All right, so Timothy, what's your pick for this one?
So Matt, I do have one, and I'll tell you, I thought this was the hardest category, and I'll tell you why. And this might be a whole another subject for another podcast. But in looking back in the movies that I have loved from being almost a teenager until now, just about everything has had not only one sequel, but in some cases closer to 10 or 11 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
And man, one thing, whenever I am doing our own podcast, I'm always very positive, and I always like to kind of shine a bright light. But I love being on the other side because then I can sort of drop the hot takes, right? I feel that the sequels have really done a disservice to the movie industry. And there's a common thing among movie executives, which seems to be things like, hey, we got the rights to this great property, and I'm really thinking we should remake it and make a sequel. But here's the thing, let's eliminate all the stuff that everybody liked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And do like a cruddy CGI version. And like you mentioned earlier, the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, which you just want to go, what are these guys doing? Like, you have this great animated style. And if you remember, they even went through a couple of iterations trying to not infuriate all the fans.
Yeah, the initial trailer broke the internet with anger. So
right. And look, I'm not in the movie business, okay? So what do I know? But it's always amazing to me that there's not one person in these boardrooms saying, hey, why don't we put in the stuff that people liked?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I get it when you're slightly off topic. I get it when you're doing something like Star Wars and, hey, you want to take it in new directions and stuff like that. And all that's fine. It seems like no matter what they do with Star Wars, the fans kind of reject it anyway. I'm not sure why that is.
That's a no-win situation for them.
Yeah, but they love to phrase it in some ways. Like one of them is, well, they just don't like female-led movies. It's like, well, wait, that's not true at all. Like my favorite one is Rogue One. I thought that was a terrific movie, and I felt that really kept the ingredients of it. And the other one was, I'm a huge Aliens fan, which that's got a female protagonist too. I guess for some of you guys that know me, I'm kind of drawn toward subject matter with female protagonists for one reason or another. So, I struggled with this question because there weren't too many movies, in my case, that didn't already have multiple sequels. Yeah. So I went, in this case, with a little bit of a funnier one, which I don't know if you guys remember this one, but it is also a little bit of a comic property, which is The Mystery Men. Mm-hmm. And what this was it's a little bit of a comedy superhero team based on the exploits of the Bob Burden superhero title called The Flaming Carrot. And this is an indie title that came out from Dark Horse. And the darn thing is just hilarious. Mm-hmm. And it just really sends up all the tropes of the superhero genre. And what I mean by that, the powers that they have are just ridiculous. Remember, you got the bowler, and his thing is he's really good at, he's the shoveler, and he's really good at shoveling, and he carries the shovel. And then there's Mr. Furious, and he's so mad at crime that he's bulletproof. And he loses his temper all the time. And then there's the Blue Raja, who's Hank Azaria from The Simpsons. Yeah. And his power is he throws forks. They're salad forks. Like the powers are just ridiculous. And, they got no business being a super team, and none of it even makes any sense. And they're fighting this villain who's Greg Kinnear. He's has like corporate sponsorships, like his evil uniforms, like Exxon, AT&T, like he's sponsored by companies. It's really very funny. And that's the one movie that was never, my understanding is it was pretty popular at the time, and it is very funny, but they never made a sequel. And I remember thinking that's one that would be perfect for a sequel. The reason why, I think movies that are humorous, they don't seem quite so dated. Like you could update it, and if the jokes are funny, it'll still be good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they had a great cast in this one too. Janine Garofalo, she had the bowling ball, and the bowling ball has the skull of her dead father in it. Like if you like sort of ridiculous comedies, you'll like The Mystery Men.
Yeah, I remember that one too. That's a fun movie, and one, like you said, no sequel, but you could bring it back, and the characters are the ones that are, I think everyone from the movie's still alive. So you bring them back, they're a little older, and now they're, they can see what's happened in their future. So yeah, that's
by the way, it's also a great movie for people who don't like superhero movies, because it's really more like Airplane than Batman, if you know what I mean. It's more like everything's a joke and none of it's really very seriously.
Yeah.
John likes it. Yeah, it's a good movie. Thanks for comment, John.
Such a good pick. And I think it was a little ahead of its time too. Like it came out before like the big wave of superhero movies. Yeah. And so like it doing a lot of satirizing of that genre. I think if it had come out like even a decade later, it probably would have been like way more popular than it was.
Yeah. When the comic book boom was going on, that movie would have been a perfect fit, but it came kind of pre-comic book boom. So it became, if you watched it, you loved it, but so many people just, it didn't get that second life on home media. like some movies, they do fairly well in the theater, and then they hit, at that time it would have been DVD, and on DVD they get second life and just blow up, and they become cult classics that everyone talks about. This one never got that status, and I think it's worthy of that status, but it kind of got unknown. So maybe Netflix needs to throw it in, and all next thing you know, Mystery Men's a top 10 streamer for the month, and it gets that second life, and hopefully we can see a sequel pop up. So for mine, I again, it's one of those ones I wrote the category, and I was having a hard time thinking of it because like Timothy said, too many sequels have come out that ruin the original, and just like, okay, you took a hard R movie and now you want to make it PG-13 for the masses, and you've taken away the heart of the film. But this one comes from the director had actually talked about it, and that is Kill Bill. Quentin Tarantino had talked about making a Kill Bill sequel that would have the Beatrix being hunted.
Oh, did he freeze? I think we might have lost Ed. You there, Ed?
Oh no.
Uh-oh. Should we guess what he was going to say?
Well, he was getting ready to talk about Kill Bill. This is a movie by Quentin Tarantino, mostly known as his love of gangster films and kung fu movies. I'll pull up a graphic while I stall for time. Had a great cast, right? We'll take a look at... oh, you know what? I don't have admin to bring up the image. Can I? Here we go. Hold on. I got you guys.
Don't worry, Tim's a professional.
Yeah, I've done this before. So the case of Kill Bill, if you remember, it was kind of controversial at the time because it was so violent. Now, the thing that I would suggest is that the violence was actually necessary and served the course of the film. D. Major, would you agree with that?
I would say so as well. I've seen Kill Bill twice. And both times I saw one half and then I left. And then I saw the other half and then I left.
Hey, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. We kept her cooking. I got an image for you to throw up.
It has been such bad internet today. I think the fires in my area have made everything really weird and problematic. So it's internet's dropping out even though I plug directly in. It's like, all right, I'm doing all the things, but you roll with it. So for mine it was Kill Bill because Quentin Tarantino had talked about doing a sequel years later when the daughter, I'm forgetting her name, but the first one that she kills, her daughter watches it and says, one day, if you want to come and get revenge, I'll understand that and I'll be waiting for you. So I think it's one of those things where I would love to see the sequel that he talked about. So Timothy had to go. So thanks for coming back on. I appreciate you coming back. This is your second week in a row. So always welcome to come back. If you like the topics we're talking about, happy to have you here. So yeah, I would love to see Kill Bill get its second chance, and not even second chance, just the sequel that Quentin Tarantino had just kind of talked about. And it could have been one of those things where he was just talking in the abstract and we'll never see it, but I would love to see that get done. So we have finished our topics for the day. So now what we're going to do is we are going to share Chris's campaign. So David, do you have anything that you're promoting right now? So you can promote your thing if it's the Kickstarter campaign or whatever it may be.
We're working on a card game called John Kenjutsu. So you can look that up online and find out all about how you can start playing, join our Discord, compete in tournaments and things of that nature. But that's the main thing we got going on now.
And have you done crowdfunding for that one yet?
We did a crowd sale back in November.
Okay.
It was for about a week and a half.
So short one.
Yeah, it was a short one. We sold about 30 copies, raised about $1,000, and got a lot of really good feedback. So it was good experience in doing a crowdfunding campaign, but we hope to come to Kickstarter soon.
Okay, great.
But yeah. And I actually need to make my move, but I'll be tuning in on YouTube, and I can't wait to hear more about your campaign, Chris.
All right. So thank you for coming on today. Appreciate you coming here and answering questions and enlightening people to some amazing indie titles that are out there.
Hey, thanks for having me. I had a great time.
So good hanging out with you.
Yep, I'll be listening.
All right. So Chris, you have the stage now. tell us about your campaign.
Cool. So this is Mandrill PI. It's the first trade collection of the series. It collects the first story arc. So it collects the first 6 issues of the comic as well as the 12-page prequel comic. It's a hard-boiled detective series set in a cartoon world starring a primate private detective who solves paranormal and occult mysteries.
Nice.
So it's kind of like Hellboy meets Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And
okay.
I like to think of it as my love letter to 80s and 90s cartoons and hard-boiled detective fiction. It is available in both comics and prose novels. So I have 4 prose novels out in the series as well. And this book is an adaptation of the first one of the novels. And it's got art by Carlos Trigo, who is just a phenomenal artist. And if you haven't seen any of his work, you get a chance now as we scroll through. But he just brings a ton of just like liveliness to his art, and he mixes the perfect amount of like emotion with this cartoon world, because ultimately this being set in a cartoon world, it's got to have both the grit of a hard-boiled detective story with some of those like cartoon tropes and pieces of humor that you would get in cartoons. The main character, the protagonist, his name is Manny Mandrill. He is a widower who has lost the love of his life, and he's kind of in this downward spiral of like grief and depression when the series starts. Over the course of the novels, he goes through this redemption arc where he ends up, going through a few different where he solves the threats to the city, and ultimately, by the last book, the last novel, he has kind of gone through his redemptive arc and the story ends. The comic is an ongoing series. So this first trade collects the adaptation of the first novel, but then the next arc is going to be not an adaptation. It's going to be a completely new story. And from there, I'm going to keep building the property over time with a ton of new stories. And then eventually we'll adapt the prose novels into comic form. What you're seeing here is the previews for the different issues. I try to toss a lot of art onto the page so that people can get a feeling of the look and feel and know if this is something that would interest them. I'll say the storyline, even though it takes place in this cartoon world, there's a lot of deeper meaning to it for me, because I was inspired to write this because over the course of both of my parents ended up dying really young, and so I was going through a lot of like grief myself, and going through some issues where I was cutting off a lot of like friends and family members, and kind of like falling into a bit of like a dark hole of depression, I would say. And through the course of coming out of that and learning to rely more on my loved ones and family and friends, I underwent my own kind of redemptive arc that I feel like is reflected in this character, Manny Mandrill. So I wanted to set the story in a cartoon world, because with cartoons, there's always the chaotic energy and the humor that surrounds everything. And then juxtaposed with that is this main character who starts really, really, really in this bad place, like addicted to alcohol, but still just this really good detective who can't help but getting himself involved in these cases that will help, him bring the city to a good place and do the right thing, because that's kind of his background. Even though he tries to resist a little bit, it's what he ends up being really, really good at. And ultimately, like I said, even if you don't identify with necessarily like the grieving protagonist arc, it's really cool art, and the storyline is just a lot of fun, and there's a lot of humor involved, and it's just a ton of fun to write.
Yeah, the art is beautiful. Just scrolling through that, because this is the first time I'm seeing this campaign, and like you said, it marries that kind of Saturday morning cartoon vibe with a darker storyline, and just beautiful looking art. I love the lettering. Even I'm looking at some of the lettering and sound effects and thinking, yeah, that's just really good stuff. So if there's any rewards you want to showcase, let me know. I'm just kind of scrolling through everything so people can see it, but I know right here we have your digital copies, so it's always good. There's some people that their entire collection sits on a hard drive and they don't want to have to find space in their garage for another long box, so You have
Yep.
them covered with your digital copies right here, and you get 6 comics and 4 novels. So yeah, that's an amazing price for all of that. Try to go on Amazon and buy your Kindle ones for that price. You're not going to get close.
Yeah, exactly. So I was trying to reward people that jumped onto the Kickstarter to get it at a little bit less pricier than you would get it on Amazon. Up here first is the soft cover, and then if you scroll down just a little bit, I've got so Alex Cormack did a variant cover for me. If you don't know who Alex Cormack is, then he's just a really prolific horror artist in the indie world, and he did this awesome cover for me that's like reminiscent of a movie poster from like the 80s, 90s. And then I've also got the hardcover version, and then I've got some really cool add-ons if we want to scroll down. Like one of my favorite things, in addition to like bundles of all the covers, and then you can get a bundle with all of the physical versions of the prose novels. You can also get your if you scroll back up just a second, you can get yourself drawn into issue number 7 as a zombified pirate, because story arc 2, a little bit of a spoiler, it's going to take Mandrill PI out onto the open seas. He's going to be on a cruise ship solving a mystery. And there's going to be some zombie pirates that kind of show up in that first issue. So you can get yourself drawn in as one of those. And then another cool reward that I do is custom short story. So it's about 10,000 words. I get it professionally edited, professional cover made for it. And essentially, like the person who gets it, they and I would align on an overarching like villain and like what their main character that partners with Manny Mandrill would be. So some of the ideas that I throw out in my videos, like, hey, if you ever want to see like, I don't know, this world's version of Bandit from Bluey team up with Mandrill PI to bring down this world's equivalent of the Paw Patrol, that's something that we could do. And we would write it in a way where it would like be completely canon to the world and be a story that just is from the background of Mandrill PI. Nice. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, there's a couple of other like really cool add-ons that I'm excited about. That right there with the Lego guy, and then Kawi Coyote is the celebrity that gets murdered in this story arc. And in true cartoon fashion, when a cartoon gets murdered, there's the ghost that shows up with the wings and the
little wings
stuff. So that's the Lego version of the ghost that shows up, and then the mad scientist Dr. Fish Market is right there on the right. So that's really fun.
Yeah,
and then there's
great.
A metal bookmark that is limited to 20, and so it'll come numbered, and it's got the Alex Cormack art on it. And
nice.
Today's the last day of the campaign, and it's been a really great campaign, and thanks to everybody so far who has backed it. And the more backers we get, the cooler the rewards become, because then we can add stuff onto the soft covers and hard covers, like the ribbon bookmarks and the spot UV stuff, the stuff we wouldn't be able to afford if we don't get high enough in the pledges. So
yeah, so it looks great. I'm definitely going to check the series out when we get done here and kind of get in there, because it looks like a lot of fun, some great rewards. I love the Lego minifigures. I mean, you can't go wrong with those. I have Lego minifigures of my characters that I've done, but I don't have any that I've put for sale. And I think, that's great that you got Lego minifigures done. So how many of each did you get done for those?
Let's see. So the Mandrill PI one, I got about 20 of these done. I had 15 for a previous campaign, so this is like the second edition of them. So like the printing has changed slightly, so that the people that got the first edition like don't feel like theirs is any less exclusive. And then I got 10 done of the Kawi Coyote and Dr. Fish Market, and so the mad scientist and the Coyote Ghost are also like equally exclusive and rare and everything. And I just thought they look really cool, because the mad scientist, the head that Saber Scorpions is the name of the guy who makes the Lego minifigs. Like he found this like silver head and then did like the printing over it, and then used one of the printing of the like mad scientist's like brain in a jar that pops through his shirt, like on the torso of the minifigs. I think he just did a good job on it.
Yeah, it looks great. And I just put the link to this campaign in the chat. So definitely head over there. It's the last day. It's funded, so you know you're going to get your books. And yeah, it looks like a really fun series. This is, as I said, my first time hearing about it, but I'll definitely be getting myself a copy of this one. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. If you want to share anything else, feel free.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, you can find any of my other work at cbrimage.com. And then I'm on Instagram as Chris Brimage author _ between each word. And then TikTok's just the opposite, author Chris Brimage _ between each word.
All right. So thank you so much for being on, Chris. I know you joined in here in the last minute, and I appreciate you coming on and kind of getting my questions with no preparation time. So thanks for your answers. Thanks for joining us. For me, you can find everything under Finish Line Comics. That's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. So if you want to find more stuff about my comic series, Immortal Era and Corruptor, head over to any of those social medias on Finish Line Comics. And I also have finishlinecomics.com with a web store. Corruptor 2 will be the next thing that's being added there. That one is currently being printed, should be in hand within a week or two. And then next week, we won't have a show because next week I will be at the Inland Empire HorrorCon, or the Creepy IE Aftermath, I believe it's its official name. But I'll be there tabling on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if you're in the Inland Empire area in Ontario, California, come on by. I'll have a nice big 10x10 booth on the main floor where I'll have copies of Immortal Era, copies of Corruptor, and I'm going to actually have the first early copies of the Cthulhu Invades Fairy Tales comic floppy version, which is a preview version just sold at cons, and there's only a limited amount of those, so I'll have those for sale for the first time, and those will be next weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the Ontario Convention Center in California. All right, so thank you everybody for watching today. I'll be back in 2 weeks with the new topics and new guests, and have a great Saturday.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.